Welcome into this week's episode of the Everyday Strength Podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Hagele. In today's episode, this week's topic, we are covering deloads. What is a deload? Who needs a deload? And ultimately, how do you perform an effective deload within your training? So, to start off, a little bit of background. What is a deload? Whenever we are training, we are trying to progress. We're trying to add a stimulus that allows our bodies to then ultimately adapt. And so the purpose of a deload is to remove that stress, to allow the body time to recover, reach a little bit of a homeostasis or a normal balance, and then allow and set the stage for that next step of the adaptation or of the progression. Okay, a deload a lot of times gets a kind of a negative rap because theoretically you are not training hard. Okay, so if you're in this grind every session, every day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, has to be just high stress, high intensity. A deload is literally the complete opposite of that. And effectively performing one allows your body to stay healthy, allows you to get better long-term adaptations, and allows you to kind of hit that next level of progression. Now, is a deload necessary? And we're going to talk about that. But first, I want to dive into a little bit of programming and physiology 101 to set the foundation. To set the foundation to allow you to kind of understand why deloads exist in the first place. So let's start off with adaptation and how our bodies adapt and what that process ultimately looks like. So Hans Selye developed the General Adaptation Syndrome. And essentially what this is alarm, resistance, exhaustion. Okay, so training and our programming and the work that we do inside the gym or on the field is the controlled stressor that you impose on your body. You're disrupting your homeostasis. You're disrupting the normalcy and the balance that your body likes. And so because of that, your body has to recover. It has to turn on these systems, turn on these functions, drive nutrients and drive hormones and cytokines and myokines and things to the body to allow it to recover. And then from there, our bodies adapt above baseline. Think about it like caffeine. We talk about how you build up a tolerance to caffeine. It's no different. If you're someone who trains and listening to this podcast, I would assume you do, whenever you first began working out, your legs were sore. You were toast. You couldn't walk the next day. Probably happened the first year, 2 years of your training where you were just really, really sore the next day. Now, if you've been training for more than a year, more than a couple months even, more than a year, more than 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, you're gradually going to experience less and less of that fatigue, less and less of that soreness, that delayed onset muscle syndrome. Doesn't mean that it's not going to happen. But unless you are driving yourself into the ground every single session, you shouldn't experience that same amount of stress that you felt the first 2, 3, 4 times that you trained. And so that's essentially what's happening with this. Over time, our bodies adapt. Just like with caffeine, the more caffeine you take, the more you can adapt, the less effective it is for you, the more you ultimately need. Similar concept here. However, the key to that is you allowed the body to adapt above that baseline because you recovered. If the stress you're applying never relents, it never lets up, then you're eventually going to just hit exhaustion and never truly be able to get to that adaptation stage. Your fatigue, the soreness, the damage that you're doing is going to outpace the adaptations. Another analogy that I love about training in general, okay, this can be said for any topic whenever we discuss programming, but training is a stimulus. It's like a drug. It's like Tylenol. Let's use Tylenol as an example. to where the right dose of Tylenol solves the problem. It cuts out your pain, maybe reduces the headache, but that's the right dose of Tylenol. Too little Tylenol, you may not experience anything. You may experience a little bit of a reduction in your pain, but you may not fully experience what you would with the correct dose if you take too little. Tylenol, as we know, if you take too much of it, it can cause, it's hepatotoxic, so it's toxic to the liver, and it could ultimately kill you if you take too much. Now, if we think about training in that way, not saying that exercise and training is going to kill you in the same sense that, a large dose of Tylenol could, acetaminophen could, but there is a therapeutic window to training where if we underdose it, it's ineffective. But if we overdose it, and if we overdose it too much, then it becomes destructive. And so most, I would say everyday athletes kind of oscillate or bounce between the two because they don't manage their fatigue. Okay, again, we need that stress. We need the fatigue that comes from it, but then we need to allow the body to recover to then adapt. And so stress, your exercise, your training with the weights, you're training on the bike, you're training on the road, that triggers the signal of, hey, body, something's going on here. We need to recover from this. And that fatigue then accumulates. Okay, it could be muscular, it can be neural, it can be the connective tissues, so your joints and your tendons. It can be metabolic, it could be autonomic, so things that you can't really control, your heart rate variability. And then recovery restores that readiness. It restores the fatigue that that's coming from the training that you're doing. And then from there, adaptation ultimately occurs with adequate recovery. So in order to be able to train hard, you have to be able to recover from your training. This is a lot of times whenever we talk about nutrition, I'm going to go off on a little tangent here, but whenever we talk about nutrition, we want protein to rebuild muscle to then be able to train hard again the next day. We, a lot of times, especially whenever you're coming up on an event, say you've got a race or say you've got a competition, right? That might be the right time to throw everything out of the window and go ahead and take some antioxidants that improve your ability to recover from an oxidative stress standpoint. Go ahead and hop in the ice bath because we're not worried about adaptation right now. We're trying to optimize how well we feel. But then if you're always taking antioxidants throughout the year, that might be detrimental because your body isn't allowing the normal processes that rebuild whatever we're looking to achieve to occur, right? If we're always jumping in a cold tub or an ice bath after training, we're blunting some of the responses, that inflammation response that is needed and is necessary to be able to adapt. And so there's definitely a time and a place, and the context ultimately is very, very important here. But we can also use deloads to manage this. So we can plan reductions in that stress to allow, the fatigue to subside and then allow adaptation to occur. So now let's discuss why the hybrid athlete and the everyday athlete, the recreational athlete needs, to really focus their efforts on incorporating some form of deload if the context matters. Ultimately, your training is not being done in a vacuum. There is job stress. There is family obligations. There are kids. There is travel. There is your training. There is your conditioning, your weight sessions. The body doesn't differentiate between the training stress that you impose on it during your 1 hour in the gym and the life stress. The deadline from your boss, the email late at night from your coworker, the random fire that you have to put out at your day-to-day job, right? Stress is stress. And so if you are accumulating all this stress inside the gym, you're accumulating this stress at work, you're accumulating the stress in your home life, and you're not planning some form of relief, you're going to lead to stagnation. You're not going to be able to adapt and get results that you're looking for. You're potentially going to injure yourself, or at least increase your risk of getting injured. And you're also just going to get chronically fatigued. Okay, we look at the rates at which testosterone and various hormones are dropping in men. A lot of it is due to just the constant stress. It can be the stress from just scrolling and doom scrolling on X or Instagram. Stress is stress. And so we have to take that into account. We're not just training in a vacuum. What we do inside the gym is one form of stress, but there's other things that impair your ability to ultimately recover. And so at the end of the day, if we understand that training works because it is a stressor, it is a stimulus, then deloads almost shouldn't be optional. They should be built into your programming, and they're built into that physiology and the physiology of adaptation. So now let's talk about deloads a little bit. We've talked about the general adaptation syndrome. I want to talk about what a deload does. So from a high level here, they reduce the cumulative fatigue that has occurred across 4 different systems. And those systems are neural fatigue, the muscular and mechanical fatigue, the connective tissue stress, and the systemic and autonomic fatigue that occurs from training. And they restore the readiness to these systems. So whenever we talk about neural fatigue, we're talking about reductions in rate coding. And this manifests in the gym as a slower bar speed, a weaker contraction. When we talk about muscular and mechanical fatigue, we're talking about the micro trauma that accumulates within the muscles, and ultimately the reduced ability for your muscles to generate tension and force. Whenever we talk about connective tissue stress, this is your tendons and your ligaments that get, again, that micro trauma that occurs to them. They repair much slower than muscles. So damage to these takes a lot of time to be able to rebuild, and also a lot of time to be able to keep up with the volume that's needed. That's why whenever we talk about increasing run volume and increasing repetitive cyclical movement volume, we need to do so very, very slow because we need those tissues to adapt. And when we talk about systemic and autonomic fatigue, this is going to manifest in an elevated resting heart rate, a reduction and a suppression in your heart rate variability, your HRV. Really good chance you're going to get poor sleep. Your sympathetic system is going to dominate that autonomic system. And so deloads help to rebalance that nervous system. They help to improve your movement quality and the ability for your muscles to generate tension and move through space. They restore bar velocity and your aerobic efficiency whenever we're doing conditioning work. And they actually can create an environment for supercompensation where you can, right, we talk about it on a graph where we have an elevation in our abilities and we can shoot above that, okay? So in the deload, that's not when you're growing. You're growing because of the deload. You're improving and you're adapting because you are having to perform that deload. Now, some mistakes that are often made here is that deloads are only for advanced athletes. Okay, and I understand why this thought occurs, and it's because, again, going back to our culture, our society, where we've got to be the hardest, right? We've got to train the hardest. We've got to push the hardest. We've got to go the fastest every week, every day. And I'm not competitive. I don't compete in powerlifting. I don't need to do a deload. I'm not a football player. I don't need to do a deload. And that mindset is very incorrect. All right. Everyday athletes, as I discussed, they actually accumulate more of that competing stress than professional athletes do. And so they almost require a deload more so than the advanced and the professionals. The other mistake is the thought that deloads don't really do anything. Why would I take a week off of training hard? Why would I cut my volume, cut my time in the gym, and I'm just going to lose all my gains, right? I'm going to lose everything that I've built over the last 6 months, over the last 4 weeks, whatever it is. And that's incorrect. That's wrong. Deloads are reduced stress, not zero stress. You can still train very, very hard during a deload, and you should in most cases. But we're just minimizing and reducing the stress that we're imposing. So now, when do you need a deload? Is this something that you should program, or are there signs that allow you to know when the time has come for you to take a reduction in your volume or reduction in your intensity? And there's some objective signs. So things that we can measure, things that we can physically see. And the first one is just looking at how you are moving during a session. Is bar speed slowed down? Is your strength decreasing? So if you're lifting a certain percentage of your 1 RM and you know that this is where you should be and you can't hit that weight today, might be time for a deload. If we talk about conditioning, right? Do your speed sessions, your threshold sessions, do those feel harder than they should, right? Because you've accumulated fatigue. So they should feel harder. That might be a sign, an objective sign, that it's time to perform a deload. Now there's some subjective signs too, things that you're going to internally feel. Maybe the joints are just cranky. They're barking at you. Things aren't moving the way that they normally do. They don't feel the best. I need to take more of that Tylenol to cut down on this joint pain. Maybe you don't have motivation. Maybe, obviously, motivation is fleeting, right? But sometimes motivation can hold pretty steady. Even if you don't feel super motivated, you're always kind of like, there's lows, but this is lower than that, right? This is where it's really like, I don't feel motivated to do anything, not just go to the gym. I don't feel motivated to get up out of bed, right? I don't feel motivated to go to work. I don't feel motivated to read or to watch shows or go out with friends, right? Motivation is drifting. It's dropping off. And the other element is just RPE, right? During your sessions, everything feels like a 9 or a 10 out of 10, okay? Subjectively, things are getting harder. Might be time to deload. There's some other signs that we can watch for. These are more environmentally, but like bad sleep. Maybe you're getting sick. Maybe your stress at work has increased. This isn't something that's, but this isn't something that you need to take a deload because of. It's something that you know at work. Things are getting stressful. Things are getting hard. This is going to be a bad week. I got meetings. I'm going to be working 12 hours every single day. Let's go ahead and take a deload. Maybe we're going to be traveling. Maybe our schedule is going to be irregular. Another sign you need to take a deload. And those are like predictive, right? If we've had a very high volume block, we know there's going to be predictable fatigue. If we're in our intensification phase, we know there's going to be predictable neural fatigue because the weights are going to be heavier. So we know when it's time to run a deload, but how do we run a deload week? So from a practical roadmap standpoint, there's a number of options here. And the first is option A, which is a reduction in our intensity. This can be anywhere from a 10 to 15% drop, keeping our volume similar. And this is going to be best for more neural fatigue. All right, whenever we've been training heavy and our joints are stressed, we've been going through heavy lifting blocks, we can reduce fatigue. The other element is reducing volume. Here we're going to cut 40 to 60%. We're going to keep the load similar, but we're going to reduce how much work we're actually doing within those sessions. And because we're going to do less sets, we're going to do less repetitions, keep our intensity the same. These are going to be best for the hypertrophy blocks and conditioning heavy blocks. Okay, so with strength work, right, these are mostly going to occur within our technique-focused main lifts. Lower body days, squat and deadlift. Upper body day, bench press, overhead press. We can keep our accessories in the session, but we might want to drop the number of sets we're doing. So if we normally do 4, maybe we cut that down to 3 or down to 2. During a deload, we're not PRing. We're not going to grind through any reps or sets. Okay? This is a deload. What you'll actually find is coming off that deload, you're probably going to be stronger the next week. That's when you PR, but not during the deload week. Whenever we talk about our strength work and how a deload works there, we can keep in that aerobic capacity, that zone 2 work. But we'll drop our threshold, we'll drop our tempo, we'll drop our speed work, the intervals that we've been doing, and we'll probably reduce our sessions anywhere from 20 to 30%. So if you're doing, a 60-minute session, we might do a 40-minute session instead during that deload week. At the end of the day, you want to manage the systemic fatigue. So we'll keep lifting volume down, or we'll keep lifting intensity down. We'll cut our intervals, or at least reduce the number of intervals that we're doing with conditioning. We'll keep that aerobic capacity in the work because it is restorative and it does help with recovery. Our skill movements, if we train with any type of skill movements or skill work, we can keep those in. But a deload should allow you to maintain your ability to do this training long term. And so however we manage that, we just want to make sure that what we're cutting and how we're cutting things doesn't affect our long-term goals, and that we're cutting the right thing, and we're cutting enough to allow the body to recover, but still stay active and potentially even aid in recovery. Now, what do we want to avoid during a deload week? We want to avoid random high-intensity workouts. Okay, there's a really good chance you might get bored. If you're taking a full 7 days of a deload, by Thursday, Friday, you're probably going to be starting to feel good. All right, motivation's going to be there, and your sessions that are normally an hour and a half are now 30 minutes, maybe 45, and you're like twiddling your thumb, sitting on the couch. I'm ready to get up and start working again. Okay, we want to avoid jumping into random workouts that don't fit with the plan and that are actually going to, in the long term, impair the recovery that we hope to achieve from that deload week. Same thing with maxing out. Okay, you might feel great on Thursday or Friday. Avoid the temptation to push hard that day. From a nutritional standpoint, we actually probably want to eat at maintenance or slightly above during a deload week. So we don't want to reduce calories. We don't want to reduce protein. We want to make sure that we're getting adequate amounts there, because that is what is helping our bodies to recover during that week. It allows our hormones to recover, our inflammatory markers to recover, the muscle to rebuild. We'll keep our mobility work and our technique work within there. And we'll also want to make sure that we don't turn a deload week into a zero movement vacation where we just don't do anything. This is the week to go out, get some walks, right? Go out, get some fresh air, do some light spinning, train with the PVC pipe and go through the motions, okay? But it's very low intensity, lower volume, and allow that process to take place. That general adaptation syndrome that we talked about, allow that to work its magic here. Now, in terms of outcomes to be expected, what do you get from a deload? What does it give you, right? It's going to allow your performance to return to a normal basis. So bar speed's going to recover. It's going to be faster, ultimately, but if you do a deload correctly, you're going to be able to produce more force and more velocity. Your injury risks are going to be reduced, okay? If we're improving our sleep, we are cutting down on the fatigue of those four systems that we discussed, then we're going to be able to better manage injury risk. Heart rate variability, resting heart rate, those should return to normal. Those should rebound back to a consistent average basis. And you should actually be stronger, be able to perform better during the next training block, during that next week, next 2 weeks. That's where that supercompensation comes into play. Okay, we push hard, we recover, and now we've risen, we've climbed to the next stair of our graph to be able to push harder. And that, at the end of the day, allows us to better accumulate high-quality training over months and over years. 1 week out of every 4, out of every 6 weeks, to allow you to train better, stay healthier, perform better over the long haul. That is what training is all about, is being able to do these things for the long haul. So I would be remiss if I didn't discuss how conjugate training, how conjugate programming fits within this. Because for a lot of folks, I don't program deloads because a lot of times they don't need it, because conjugate has systems in place that allow you to manage fatigue better. Not completely, but better. And so conjugate, as we know, is inherently self-regulating. Okay, you're rotating exercises weekly. You're changing your supplements, the supplemental lifts frequently. Ranges, rep ranges, bands and chains, stances, those are all varying week to week, or at least month to month. And dynamic effort work is submaximal. Repetition effort work is submaximal. And so volume is going to naturally ebb and flow from session to session and week to week, right? If we're training 4 sessions in a week, not every session is hard. We have our hard sessions and we have our submaximal sessions. And that ultimately prevents stagnation and more localized overuse. But the element to remember is that conjugate training, that rotation and that variation, doesn't protect you from systemic fatigue. It just allows you to manage it better. The central nervous system can still accumulate stress, right? Your connective tissues, the muscles, those all still accumulate stress. Your autonomic system still gets pushed towards sympathetic dominance over the course of weeks after that maximal effort strain. But you can build in deloads using the conjugate method just by changing the movements. Again, physiology doesn't care what method you're using. And conjugate isn't some form of a cheat code that allows you to escape your biology and your physiology. The human body doesn't care whether fatigue comes from max effort box squats or you using linear periodization. That stress still accumulates. That stress still adds up. And so conjugate allows you to disperse it better, but it doesn't ultimately eliminate it. And so even if you train conjugate, you still need to look for the signs that we discussed. And throughout the year, throughout your phases, throughout your key blocks, you still need a deload. And it can still accumulate even if you're doing maximal work, but especially if you're doing more submaximal work, where we're not doing just a true one set, get in, get out, but we're instead doing a heavy set of 3, heavy set of 2, and we might do 2 or 3 sets of that, right? To increase the volume. So that stressor is still going to be imposed on the body, and we still have to be able to recover from that. And that neural fatigue, that is going to be what's the silent killer for most of the everyday athletes out there. Because you still have the stressors that we talked about that aren't inside the gym. Family, jobs, kids, travel, all the things that come up. And so in a standard conjugate system, right, many lifters will tend to run waves, 3-week waves, where week 1 is more moderate, week 2 is hard, week 3 is very hard, and then week 4 is that deload or reload, right, where we start to now cut the intensity, the weight on the bar. We may cut a set or 2 out. That's how I tend to program the most, is using that 3-week method. And a lot of times the deload is built into week 1 of the next week, right? So if we're changing things on a 3-week wave or a 4-week wave, that first week we're learning, our bodies are learning new movements, new exercises, and we can't train them as hard. 1, we may not know what weight we need to use, but then 2, we're just not going to train it as hard the first time that we've done it. And we're going to progressively increase the weight and the resistance and the load. And so a lot of times how I'll program is we don't call it a deload, but it's inherently built in. So we're teaching. Okay, week 1 is, let's learn this new movement. This is actually our deload coming off of a hard block the month before. And then the next week, we're going to now add some load. That next week, we're going to increase the load more. We may do a set or 2 more. That 3rd week, we're going to push it. If we're doing a specific movement, a specific maximal effort variation, let's push it. Let's see what you've got. And then the next week, now let's change the exercise. So now we got to start this process all over. We got to relearn, and ultimately it's kind of like a hidden deload, a silent deload. I don't tell my clients that, hey, this is deload week. We just learn a new exercise. So that's a great way, from a practical standpoint, how you can think about programming deloads in. Others, you may want to stretch out a true reduction, a true deload every 4 weeks, every 6 weeks. During more high intensity blocks, we probably want to push those deloads a little bit, a little bit closer together. During more of an accumulation phase, a lot of times we can go 6 weeks, and then on the 7th, we implement that deload. But if you're in heavy prep, you're in intensification or a realization phase, and you're about to peak for an event, we may need to implement a more frequent deload, maybe every 3 weeks, maybe every 2. Okay, so ultimately, at the end of the day, right, Conjugate is a system. It doesn't eliminate deloads. It just allows you to change the cadence. And so with that said, deloads are things that you should potentially look into implementing, right? You can certainly train. A lot of people do it, that they train without a deload. But there's definitely a pro, and probably more pros to frequently performing deloads than not. Just in terms of long-term adaptation, long-term development. Frequently reducing and cutting the stressor that you're imposing on your body allows it to adapt better over time. And so that wraps up this week's episode of the Everyday Strength Podcast. I appreciate you being here. If you're not already, make sure that you're subscribed on YouTube, Apple Podcast, or Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts from. And while you're there, leave a review or a 5-star rating and allow us to be able to push this information out to more people. Another area that you can subscribe to is the Performance Edge Network. That's available at hagelestrength.com/newsletter. And there, what the Performance Edge Network gives you is access to the weekly emails, the weekly newsletters that discuss more about these topics, things that interest you, and things that allow you to be a better everyday athlete. As always, I appreciate you for tuning in. Keep training hard, keep training smart, and I will see you next week.